Pancakes! Pancakes!
Jamaican me crazy. That's right, we're in Jamaica this time. And we're talking about drugs. Drug bosses. A big boss. Let's watch it.
Circles in the air as soldiers fire mortar shells into densely populated civilian areas while taking fire from heavily armed militias.
Oh wow.
Over
like
3
Mogadishu.
days, over 70 civilians are killed. But this is not a war zone in Afghanistan or Somalia. This is a drugs bust in Kingston, Jamaica.
Damn.
Police in Jamaica are calling for nationwide tranquility, urging people to remain calm following the arrest of a reputed drug baron and gang leader.
A few miles away, tourists are sipping rum and smoking weed in resort hotels. And to be fair, this is no ordinary drugs bust. This is the massive military operation it took to bring down Dados Coke, also known as the President.
His
What
real
a-
name is
what an
Christopher
awesome
Michael
name.
Koch. Now the man considered to be one of
Dodos.
the world's most dangerous drug kingpins has been captured and brought to justice.
This is how a narco warlord mixed drugs, violence, and political connections to wield power throughout Jamaican society. This is the story of Dados Coke, aka the secret president of Jamaica.
So pretty much like every other country, right?
Dados Coke's rise to power is rooted in the brutal gang violence that has scarred Jamaica for half a century, and how this violence has been manipulated and encouraged by the country's political elite. When Jamaica gained independence
America.
from Britain in 1962, the country quickly came to be dominated by two political parties, the left-leaning
America.
PNP and the more pro-American Jamaican Labour Party. In particular, two leaders, Michael Manley of the PNP and Edward Seaga of Labour, divided power between them, swapping stints as Prime Minister for decades.
On the Michael Manley campaign trail, it's a day of spot meetings deep in the agricultural heartland of rural Jamaica.
So two white
He
guys
caps his message with the cry, "Forward with socialism,"
fighting over Jamaica.
but later denies that he aims to establish a second communist Cuba in the Caribbean.
These two men emerged as the first political leaders in independent Jamaica. They had a kind of messianic aura about them. People looked to them for new paths for the independent Jamaican society.
And this political rivalry played out on the streets. Each party made alliances with gangster bosses known as Dons who ran certain neighborhoods. The semi-official deal was that the Don would deliver the votes of the people in their area, and in return, they could run organized crime syndicates with protection from the police.
The Jamaican Don really evolved first as a political enforcer. If you happen to be residing
So
in
basically
a
those two
PNP
guys
community or a
pretty
JLP
much
community,
were
then the enforcer's job is to
behind it all.
enforce that
the catalyst
political loyalty sticks,
of what Jamaica
whether
is
you
today,
like it
the
or
violence and
not.
stuff. But they don't want to talk
These
about that. They
alliances
want to talk
between
about,
politicians and gangsters would erupt into
gangsters.
open gang warfare, particularly in the run-up to elections, as each party tried to intimidate the other's supporters.
One of the most important aspects of the election has
Dancing
been the
with the devil.
violence that's marked the campaign. And whilst politicians have argued, gunmen have been shooting it out in the streets.
As the murder rate spiraled out of control, rumors circulated that weapons were being supplied by the CIA and Cuban paramilitaries.
I don't doubt
Neighborhoods
that.
became known as garrisons, literal fortresses which police couldn't enter, with gang bosses wielding almost complete control. And just as the violence was getting so bad that not even Bob Marley could fix it, something happened
Damn.
to make it even worse. The war on drugs.
Yep.
This is crack cocaine, seized a few days ago by drug enforcement agents in a park
See?
just
Butterfly
across the
effect.
street
Happened
from the
here,
White
then
House.
it's
Let there be
reverberated
no
around the
mistake.
world.
This stuff is poison.
In the 1980s, cocaine and crack cocaine exploded in popularity across America. Jamaica sits exactly halfway between Colombia and southern Florida and became a key trafficking hub. This fundamentally changed the balance of power between the politicians and the Dons. Instead of the gangsters waiting for handouts and building contracts from the government, they now found themselves at the center of a multi-billion-dollar trade.
By 1980, there is this influx of cocaine coming through the Caribbean corridor into the United States. And these political enforcers, they are now making a lot of cash from trafficking marijuana and trafficking cocaine.
The most important garrison community in Jamaica at the time was the West Kingston ghetto of Tivoli Gardens. As the cocaine trade began to boom, Tivoli was controlled by a gang known as the Shower Posse, strongly allied to the Jamaican Labour Party.
The Shower Posse got its name because of its brutality. The Uzi and the Tech 9, those were guns that the Shower Posse really loved. They would take out their opponents by showering bullets.
Jamaican gangs like the Shower Posse and their rivals, the Spangler Posse, spread out across the US and the UK. Unlike the Colombian and Mexican trafficking groups, who concentrated on the wholesale side of the cocaine business, the Jamaican gangs also began taking control of street corner dealing in American cities, and this brought them into bloody conflict with local American dealers. The Jamaican gangs were used to fighting full-scale street battles with automatic weapons and brought a whole new level of violence to the American gang wars. The US was already experiencing a spike in homicides throughout the 1980s, but the arrival of the Shower Posse and other Jamaican groups is thought to have accelerated this, with estimates of them being responsible for over 1,400 homicides by the late 80s. This was when Dudus took control of the Shower Posse and massively expanded its drug trafficking operations. It's also when people started calling him the President. Dudus dramatically reorganized the Shower Posse's operations in the US, adopting a franchise model where individual cells were free to run themselves across America as long as they sent money and guns back to Jamaica. But back in Tivoli Gardens, his authority was absolute.
He is the supreme kind of leader of Tivoli Gardens, this almost state within the Jamaican state.
The entrances to the garrison were blocked by barricades, so police couldn't enter. The Shower Posse were the law. And this is where the story gets complex, because for a murderous gangster, Dudus can also claim to have helped his community. Dudus ran significant charity and welfare programs in Tivoli, including after-school clubs, help for the elderly, and food handouts. And through legitimate companies, he put on major music festivals featuring Jamaica's biggest stars, as well as receiving over $1 million in government contracts, through which he employed local people.
He provided access to things which the Jamaican state has either been unwilling or incapable of providing. So there was a healthcare facility in that community. There's a sports complex, a very good one, by the way, in that community. He was loved in the community. He was respected, but he was also feared.
Many people in Tivoli appear to have genuine loyalty and even love for Dudus.
The Crips, we have blood, I'm a bigger terrorist than Dudus. Leave him alone. We not give up with Dudus, we love him bad, and we are going dead for him.
He's name-checked in songs by everyone from reggae legends like Bunny Wailer to UK grime MCs like Skepta. On the other hand, Dudus was unquestionably responsible for murders and extreme violence. In his trial, people testified that his form of justice involved cutting people who crossed him with hatchets and chainsaws. And eventually, Dudus's power brought him to the attention of the DEA. Secret memorandums were drawn up whereby Jamaican police would run wiretaps on the president, but the operation would be run through Washington. The investigation took over 5 years and involved the US giving Jamaican police over $3 million. But eventually, in 2009, the US issued an extradition request.
The then Prime Minister of the day, Bruce Golding, happened to also be Member of Parliament in Western Kingston, which is where Tivoli Gardens is. And Coke is from that area. So the Prime Minister was hesitant with the United States around extradition. What you saw happening was a kind of international relations standoff.
These scandals proved too much for the government, and eventually they sent in the police. But Dudus commanded loyalty across Tivoli and had an army of gunmen to back him up. The police literally couldn't enter the garrison to arrest him, so the army moved in.
My fellow Jamaicans, good evening.
Oh, they
this
brought
afternoon, the
army
cabinet in the emergency session
That's how you know you
took
big
the
and bad when
decision
they
to advise the Governor General to issue a proclamation declaring a state of public emergency effective 6 p.m. today.
The Americans supplied a military drone, and soldiers even fired artillery into Tivoli housing projects.
A lot of human rights violations happened in that process. Innocent persons certainly got caught up and were killed. Several residents gave horrific stories of what they had to undergo during that incursion.
Them won't let us out. We can't come out and buy food. We're hungry. We can't come out.
Oh, that's fucked up. No one ever charged Dudus for murder, racketeering, or political corruption. This was a drug bust, organized by the DEA on trafficking charges. But it was a drug bust in which the army was deployed, over 70 people were killed, and which caused a political scandal across Jamaican society.
To police here, he was a drug dealer, gun smuggler, and leader of a gang called the Shower Posse. Coke was arraigned Friday in a Manhattan federal court. He pleaded not guilty to federal drug and weapons charges.
Dudas eventually wound up in court in New York and was sentenced to 23 years. Not only is the Don system still flourishing, but despite all the people killed and all the millions spent bringing down the president, the drugs are still flowing into the US.
Exactly.
In fact, as America has poured resources into its southern border, the Caribbean is now seeing a new uptick in drug smuggling, particularly from the emerging narco state of Venezuela.
So why don't they
Jamaica
put
itself
stuff around
voted to
Jamaica?
decriminalize cannabis in 2015. But as long as the American war on drugs continues, its gangsters will continue to get rich, rule their garrisons, and corrupt the island's politics.
Yep. So that was Vice News with their Jamaican drug boss, the president. Pointless in arresting him and putting him in jail because it didn't stop anything. That's all. I mean, what did it help? I mean, they killed 70 people. It says 70. I believe it was way more than 70 people they killed. And the DEA can say, you know what? It was talk to Jamaica. To have them do their dirty work so they can just wipe their hands clean and say it wasn't us. You know how dirty America is. But it is what it is.